Welcome to the last session of Chapter 7. In this session, we're going to talk about some of our cool little widgets and how to make them work. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is numeric data, and there are two different ways that we can do numeric data with our widgets. The first is what we call a spinner control, and this adds up and down arrows to the side of your number to allow you to increase and decrease that number, so you're spinning the number. We can enter the min and max values, and we can also enter a step. How much do you want it to move every time that you push a button? So we can have a step of like 2 or 10 or something like that so that it jumps by that many. For those, we use the type of a number. So if we use a number type, it's going to create this spinner control. Another option that we have is what we call a range slider. This range slider allows us to take the little slider and move it left or right to increase or decrease our number. This one, you give min and max values and steps as well. And you can use the type of range. So when you type in range, that is going to be the type that you get. So you automatically get a range slider. Both of these are browser-specific styles. So the styles are going to be dependent upon which browser you have, although you can use some cross-browser appearances to set the type and to give some CSS for these. Let's go look at entering in numeric data. Just to remind you of what we're doing in this project, how far we've come. So we've gotten all of our customer information. We got the selection list. Where did you hear about us? We've got our checkbox at the bottom. And over on our experience side, we have our data visit and our order type. We've got our service here and our text area, which means the two things we need to continue working on are our slider here and our number spinner. How many times do you dine out per month? So we're going to add those two next. So our how many times do you dine out per month is going to be our first one that we're going to be working on. So we're going to add this before our checkbox, but after our where did you hear about us? So here I'm going to go ahead and do my div. And my form row. I'm going to go ahead and add in my label. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my input. So this input, its name is going to be dine out. That's what's going to be going to the server. My ID is going to be dine spin because it's going to be a spinner. Its type is going to be a number. I'm going to add in a value of 1 because I'm going to default it at 1. I'm going to let the user go ahead and change that as they feel fit. Our step is just going to be 1 because we only want it to increase by 1 at a time. Our minimum is going to be 0. We don't want them to be able to put less than 0. And our maximum is actually going to be 20. Now, in theory, there are people who go out more than 20 times in a month, but we're going to say 20 is a good, nice stopping point. So here we have our how many times do you go out per month. And as you can see, it started at 1 and it's got the little arrows that move up and down. We can go up to 20 and then it'll stop. See, it'll max out at 20. Same with going back down to 0. It'll stop at 0 and it won't go any lower because we've given that min and max. We're also going to go ahead and enter in some style rules for this because we want to make sure that it looks the way that we want. So we're going to come over to our CSS and we're going to enter in our spinner styles. In this case, we're going to have a div that's a form row. And we want to have a child that is an input box with a class or with an ID of dine spin. So specifically this one. We're actually going to put it in a flex because it's going to help it to format nicely. So we're going to go WebKit flex 0, 0, 50 pixels. And we're going to tell it to flex at 0, 0, 50 pixels. You can see we just wanted it to be a little bit smaller. We didn't want it to grow as much, and we wanted the text size to stay kind of small. So we could do that to our spinner to make it just a little bit smaller. It still works. It's just a little smaller. Next, we're going to build our range slider. And this one, if we go back over here, is going to go underneath our yes and no here before our tell us more about your experience. So let's go back to our HTML. We are going to scroll down. Here's our experience info down to the bottom before we get to our text area. So right about here. And we are going to go ahead and add a div. And inside of our div, we're going to add our label. And that's going to be for range box, because we're going to add in a range box. Rate the overall service. Add in some CSS with a break tag. And tell them we want 0 for poor and 10 for great, just to give them a little visual of what we want them to do with the slider. Now we have our input. Name is going to be service rate. ID is going to be range box. Remember, that's what we named it right above it. Type is going to be a range. Our value, default value, is going to be 5. So we're going to start them at 5. Step is going to be 1. Min is going to be 0, because that's poor. And max is going to be 10, because that's what we want to do for our max. So now we've got our little slider here. And I am in Edge right now, so Chromium. And this is what it looks like in this one. If I opened it up in a different browser, it would look a little bit different because each of them has their own. But you can see it's at 5. It can go up to 10 and go down to 0. If the next example we're going to give you is suggesting options with data lists. So with a data list, you can populate the list with what your options are. And then when the user starts to type in the data in the text field, it will drop down a little pop-up that says, these are the ones that have those letters in it. We can give lots of possible values with different options, and then we simply put those into an element called a data list inside of our form. Then we have to make sure that we attach the list to the input itself. So we can have an input that's just a regular text box that's a type of text, but it uses a list, and that list will automatically populate with auto-completing as we go through. So let's go see how we can use auto-completing with a data list. We're now finally going to fill in the what is your favorite special dish, which is going to be under our customer info, in between the where did you hear about us and our spin box. So we have what is our favorite dish. And in this one, we're going to be using our data list to pre-populate our options. So let's scroll back up to our customer info. Where did you hear about us? And our spinner. So we're going to put it in between here. We're going to go ahead and make our div class. And inside that, we're going to add our label. For your favorite dish. What's your favorite dish? Question mark. All right, so here we are going to have an input, and its name is going to be fave dish. Its ID is going to be dish, because it has to match our 4 above. Its type is going to be text. So you could normally just type it in there. Except in this case, we're going to go ahead and add a list. So this is for our autocomplete. Dish type. We're going to close our input. Now we're going to build our data list. Its ID is going to be dish type. So that has to match the same one that we had above. And then inside of here are our options. So we're going to say option value. Antipasto pizza. So here I'm going to go ahead and just enter in all the different options that we have for our data list. So we have our options of our dish types here. So when I hit save and refresh, you're going to see what is your favorite dish, and you're going to have that drop down there. But more importantly, if I type in antipasto, it is going to limit that group to just the ones that are in my group. If I delete that and look at it, all of them are there. If I type in pizza, that gives me just my pizzas. But if I write pasta, like my pasta rolls, it limits it to that. So you can see that we can get some drop downs here that will help us. Obviously, at the bottom of every form, you're going to have some buttons. Some are going to say submit and some are going to say cancel or reset. And those buttons can do 3 different things. We can have the buttons run a command using some JavaScript. We can have them submit the form using a submit type, or we can have them reset the form fields to the defaults with a reset or a cancel. We can use custom buttons using images or text. In this case, we're just going to use text, which is fine. And all we have to do is do an input with a type that is either a button or a submit or a reset. If it's a button, we need to give it an on-click event. And I think we'll talk about events when we get into JavaScript. But for right now, it's the event that occurs when you click the button. So we can give an on-click event if you're going to be using a script, or a type of submit or reset. So let's add those to the bottom of our form. We're finally going to go ahead and add our submit and cancel buttons at the bottom of our page. So directly above the closing form tag. So we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Here is our form tag. So above it, outside of our field lists, or our field sets. So our field sets are still here. We are going to go ahead and create a div. Its ID is just going to be buttons, because that's where I'm going to be putting my buttons. And I'm going to have an input. Its type is going to be submit. Submit is a very special type because it tells you, go ahead and do the action for this form. And my value is, what do I want the text of the button to say? Submit my survey. Underneath that, I'm going to write my input, type equals reset, and its value is going to be cancel. So you can see now we have our 2 buttons down at the bottom. Submit my survey is going to run the action, and cancel is going to go ahead and reset everything. So if I type in Cheryl here and I hit cancel, you'll see that goes away. If I type in Cheryl here and hit submit, it's going to yell at me because I'm not actually ready to submit yet. Now, those don't look very good because they're at the bottom and they're in the wrong place. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our forms, and we're going to deal with our form button styles. So we're going to do, if you're a div of type buttons, we are going to tell you to text align in the center, and our width is going to be 100% because we want it to go all the way across, and then the center of that equals. Sorry, very strange. Underneath that one, we are going to make our buttons look a little different. So we are going to say, if you're an input and you're of type equals submit, or you are an input with a type equals reset, then we want to have a font size of 1.2 EM, just to make them a little bigger. We're going to add a little bit of padding of 5 pixels, and we're going to add a margin of 15 pixels. That's just going to make these boxes just centered and not centered. Div buttons. Oh, don't need quotes for 100%. What was I thinking? There we go. So they're centered and just a little bit bigger. So that makes us a little happier. And our form is looking nice and lovely. Really important with your form is what we call validating, being able to validate the data either before you send it over to the web server, or once you're on the web server, at least validate it before you send it to the database. So as much validation as we can do to make sure that the data looks right when it goes in. We can do our client-side validations before you even submit by either requiring an item, by typing in the word required, and that will make sure that if the field is not populated, it will not let you submit. We can give a specific pattern or a specific type of input. So our type of input could be either an email or a phone or something like that that could have a specific type. We can also use what we call a regular expression. And regular expression is explained in a lot of different places, but in this case, it's simply saying for the zip code here, we want digits with 5 characters. So we need at least 5 characters for our digits. You can also say that there's a max length for an item, and that will also help you with validation to make sure that your data comes back like what you expect. So we're going to add some validation to our form to go ahead and make sure that some data fields get filled in correctly. Again, formatting is going to use some cross-browser support using the types of bubble messages or types of messages that come up. We can change the backgrounds and things like that. So let's go do our web form or our validation. Now we get to talk about our required and validation. So we have done our buttons, but we haven't limited our requireds yet. So over on my survey, I want my email and my name to be required. So I'm going to come over here and make those required. So my customer name here, after its placeholder, I'm going to just type in required. So now when I hit refresh, if I say submit my survey, it's going to pop up this thing saying, please fill out this field. You needed that. So we're going to make that required. We're also going to make the email required. This is the first level of validation, just adding in requireds. So even if I come over here and enter my name, it's still going to yell at me about my email because it wants my email in there. The next is going to be our validation based on our data type. So in our data type for our email, we are going to tell it that's of type email instead of type text. By telling it it's of type email, it will make sure that it needs to be an email value. So if I come over here and type in goober and put in my name here, it's going to yell at me because it knows that an email address needs to have an ampersand or an A inside of it. So now it's fine. It's still going to say that it's not sending data because that's fine. So that has done it based on type. So being able to enter in the type of email helps. Now we're going to do a regular expression for our postal code and our phone number. We have been given regular expressions in our text, so the projects probably will as well. In this case, we are doing a regular expression that says give me 5 characters and then possibly give me a dash and 4 more. So that's my regular expression for my postal code. And then my phone number, if you're going to have 10 characters, is a 334 like a regular phone number is. So I'm actually going to copy this postal code regular expression, go back to my HTML, go down to my postal code, which is here. Close that out so I can have a little bit more space. And I'm going to add in a pattern. And paste in that form. So if I come over here and I want to type 1, 2, 4, 5 or something like that. Again, it's going to go all the way down and it's going to hit that one next and it's going to say, please match the requested format because that's not the right format. As you can remember, this was the right format. We're going to do the same thing for our regular expression for our phone number. Let's say pattern equals and now for a phone number as well, it's going to give us please match the requested format because I have the wrong format for my phone number. But if I type in my 10 characters, it's going to let me go because it wants 10 characters. In addition to those types of validations, we can also apply inline validations. These are checked as the user enters data. So as the user's entering data, we can change the background color of our field. As soon as they select focus, we can change the background color. If it's invalid, we can change that as well. So we can use any of these optional pseudo classes, remember, so that you can do the colon and then select one of your pseudo classes. When the item gets focus, that means when somebody has entered the item, or if it is in range, if it's invalid, if it's optional, you can change any of these. So any of these inline validations with pseudo classes are useful. In this case, we're going to be changing our background of invalid, and we're going to even add a check or an X, so a little green check or a little red X, as just a visual clue of you messed up somehow when you typed this in, go back and go fix it. So let's see how we can apply inline validations. We're now going to add some inline validation to clean things up so that we can see when the user clicks into something and whether they have entered in an appropriate value. Inline validation is in your CSS. So we're going to put it down here. The first one we're going to do is say if the input box is in focus, which means it is the one that the person is currently typing in. I want to change the background color. So I'm going to do input colon focus, comma, select button or select thing with a focus, comma, or a text area that is in focus. So any of these, I want to change the background color. It's not a real significant one, but just a little bit of a background. See how it turned green when you clicked on it? Any of them will. So isn't that nice to be able to have it green so that you know which one you're working on? You can also hit the tab button to switch between them, and you can see how the tab button moves down and goes down to submit. We're also going to add a pseudo class or an inline validation for our values. For our name, zip code, phone, mail, so on and so forth, to add a little green check mark if the data is valid. So let's see how that looks. We're going to go input, and if you are name and you are focused. So if the user has focused on you and you are valid, comma, input, and if you are the zip code, you are unfocused and you are valid, comma, and you are input and your phone number, you're focused and you're valid. Finally, if you are input male, focus, valid. Then I'm going to change your background color or your background to specifically RGB, so that 220, 255, 220, so that greenish color, and with the URL RB valid PNG. And we're going to use the bottom right, contain, and no repeat. Now, what is this going to do? We're going to come over here and we're going to click here. We're going to select something and we're going to check out of it. See, it's got that little green checkbox. That little green checkbox tells us that so far we're okay. We have to add in some extra code for our invalid. So these were all the valid ones. So if I enter in a valid information here, it should do that little green checkbox. See, when it was back one, it didn't put the little green checkbox. As soon as we added up in our 5 letters, put in a dash, it's waiting for me to get the last little bit, then the little green checkbox. Now with the autofill, it doesn't do it as well. So if I had typed in Cheryl here, little green checkbox would come up. If I select it, it doesn't do as much. So let's do the invalid version. And we are going to do each of these, but we're going to do those with an invalid instead. So name, focus, invalid. We're going to change our RGB to more of a red. So we're going to 255, 232, 233. And instead of our URL being valid, we are going to do our URL invalid. Bottom right contain no repeat. Now, if I'm going to, there's nothing in there right now, so it's red with a little checkbox. As soon as I start typing, I'm okay. Come down to the postal code. If I start typing, it's red with a little checkbox. As soon as I get to one that works, it goes back to green. It's going to get mad because it just wants, there it goes, just the letters. Okay, so you can see how those inlines with changing the background color makes things work, and it tells the user whether their data is right or wrong. All right, so you've gotten to the end of chapter 7. For this chapter, your review assignment is going to be 2 different web forms. So there's 2 of them. Please don't just stop with the first one. You're going to add a customer information form as given on the example here, and a build your own pizza web form. Please follow the directions exactly on this one because I want this one to be exact. I'm not going to give you a lot of freedom on the review assignment. But you're going to be following the directions in the review assignment to make sure that you understand how to create this web form and how to add your controls and your widgets to it. When you are finished, hopefully your site is up and you can start pushing it to your site. If it is not up yet, you can go ahead and push it to D2L. For our case 1, we are going to be doing a conference registration form for the conference. They've given you the list of fields that you're going to be adding, and they've given you the data field and the control ID, what type and whether it's required, and if there's any placeholders. So you're going to be using the information given to go ahead and create this conference registration form. Follow the examples and make sure that you use the example.com as your post method. For your case 4 for this project, you're going to be doing a mail-in ordering company for computer parts. You're going to be building their web form for ordering those parts. They've given you a parts list, so you should be using that parts list in your ordering form. Your form submission should use the script that's given. Be sure to do all of the requirements, although you can have some fun with how you want to lay it out and how you want to design it. But you do want to make sure that you can do your form submission using the script and that you use the parts and that it's an appropriate screen or appropriate form, web form for entering in these parts. So have fun with chapter 7, and we will talk soon.